The most watched State of the Union was Bill Clinton's 1993 address, with over 66 million viewers. The most viewers Bush Jr. got was 62 million in 2003, Obama saw 52 million in 2009, and Trump saw 47 million in 2017. Now, if you're keeping track so far, that's a downward trend over the last 30 years. And why is that? Perhaps because Americans have realized that these speeches are mostly just campaign speeches or propaganda platforms. And last week, in President Biden's third and possibly his final State of the Union, his speech was not all that different from his predecessors in front of 32 million viewers, half of what Clinton saw just 30 years before. But since Biden is the incumbent president and we've officially entered the primary election, there's a lot that we need to talk about from last Thursday's speech on Capitol Hill. So let's get to it. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing the content, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you were meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug. Or you can sport the God Bless America shirt and, of course, the classic We the Free crest tee. We've even got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle. That's right. So check out our new merch at wethefreeshow.com. On January 8th, 1790, President George Washington gave the first ever State of the Union address in New York City, which was the U.S. Capitol back then. No, he wasn't just trying to start a presidential tradition. The address was practically mandated by the newly adopted Constitution, which still reads to this day in Article 2, Section 3, "He shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them. With respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States." So the first ever State of the Union address was President Washington. It included members of both houses, and he covered national debt, military preparedness, Native American affairs, trade, and the establishment of a national university. That was 1790. Well, now it's 2024, and Joseph Robinette Biden is the 46th president of the United States. He's in the final stretch of his term, and last week he gave his third and hopefully his final address. Today we're going to go through his State of the Union speech. Now, I know you may have already heard a lot of analysis on this, but you haven't heard mine. So let's begin. First, Biden was about 15 minutes late because Palestinian protesters blocked the presidential motorcade. Here's a look at that.
And we begin with breaking news now at 9 o'clock. You're taking a live look near the U.S. Capitol, where a large crowd of protesters has gathered blocking the presidential motorcade route. They've been out there for several hours now, and we know this comes as President Biden begins his State of the Union address. We understand the president left the White House about 10 or 12 minutes ago to get to the U.S. Capitol. But again, this group has been out there protesting for several hours now. This is a live shot right now. It appears the group is calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Of course, we'll continue to monitor.
While the cameras waited for the arrival of the president, everyone was watching the other leaders of our government chit-chatting and shaking hands. It seemed very much like a red carpet event or the Met Gala, but instead of these officials wearing distinguished designers, they were wearing their causes, like several of the Democrat women were wearing all white in support of women's reproductive rights, while the pro-war factions sported Ukrainian pins, while others wore pins in support of the Palestinians. Look at how virtuous we are. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene was wearing her MAGA costume, but we'll take a look at that in just a minute. Once Biden finally arrived, the first people to speak to him were two representatives from my state, Andy Ogles and Tim Burchett. Burchett is responsible for my district here in Tennessee. Congressman Ogles said a few words, but Burchett was having a full-on conversation with Biden, and you couldn't hear anything on the broadcast that they were saying, but Burchett explained it this week.
You know he's medicated, and he has a very limited time. I was told by actually a member of the medical profession in the Democratic Party that he probably had about 55 minutes. So Matt Gaetz and Boebert are standing over there beside me, and Matt says, Burchett, do one of your endless stories, and let's see if you can double the time you delayed him from last year. So I leaned over to him and I said, Mr. President, I said, my brother used to have a 1972 Chevy Corvette, had a 350 in it. And he says, really? And I said, yeah. I said, a girl asked me out one time to a Sadie Hawkins dance, and so my brother let me take it. I said, that was 1980. And then I said, I peeled out in the parking lot of Brunswick Billiards. And then I said, I started talking about the vet and how it peeled out. And then I said, you know, my wife and I really like chocolate chip ice cream. And then he just looked at me like, wow. And he goes, really? He said, so he started talking about chocolate chip ice cream. And then he asked me if he could have Kelly's phone number. And I thought, you creepy old dude, I'm not going to swap wives with you. And then he got away from me, and Matt said something like, see if you can get him back, Burchett, or something. But then he came back and I said something, hey, have you seen those new Corvettes? And he said, yeah. He said, man, they're nice. And I said, yeah. I said something about they kind of remind me of Ferrari or something. And then I said, man, they're really fast. And he said, yeah. He said, they'll go 0 to 60. And he goes like this. And he paused, just this awkward pause. And he said, in 1 second. And I was like, what? I was like, man, your eyeballs would be pulled out your ear holes, at that kind of speed, This is like fighter jet stuff. And then he goes, they're electric. And I said, I ain't no fan of those electric ones. And then I just turned. I turned from him.
So as President Biden made his way down the aisle, several of the congressmen and women were like your grandparents, trying to work their reverse cameras to take selfies with Biden. But he would eventually make his way down the aisle despite Congressman Burchett's tactics and finally begin his speech. In total, Biden talked for 68 minutes, which was honestly surprising, but definitely what the Democrats wanted and what Biden was heavily medicated for. Speaking of the first State of the Union, Washington spoke for only 10 minutes, while the longest address was Bill Clinton's final address in 2000, which was over an hour at about 9,000 words. Biden's heavy treatment, his medical treatment, contributed to the loudest and angriest State of the Union that has ever been given. And he fluctuated between that of an auctioneer and a nursing home patient. Yes, Biden's tone was incredibly frustrated and angry, as you'll see. But the yelling reminded me of a line from Denzel Washington in the movie American Gangster, where he said that the loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. Now, the best line of the night was Biden's opening line. The first thing he said, watch this.
If I were smart, I'd go home now.
Now that was just about the only comical moment, and it was all downhill from here. Biden would immediately speak about the Ukrainian conflict with Russia. He was essentially making the claim that he needed to stay in power in order to defeat Vladimir Putin and the Russians. He based this off of a lie the liberals are spreading about Trump apparently telling the Russians that if he was president, they could do whatever they wanted. Watch.
Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable.
No, Trump did not say this. Here's what actually happened and what was actually said.
They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills. And the money came flowing in. I said, no, you have to understand, you don't pay your bills, you get no protection. It's very simple. Hundreds of billions of dollars came into NATO, and that's why they have money today, because of what I do.
President Trump said this as a tactical threat to another NATO member, as he has done in the past while he was in office, as a way to get them to pay their fair share of dues. And it worked. He did not say this to Vladimir Putin, and of course, he would not say that. He's the same person who told Putin that if he moved on Ukraine that he would, quote, hit Moscow. But Biden went on to speak more about Russia, of course. He bragged about Sweden being adopted into the NATO countries. He even had the Swedish Prime Minister in the gallery as one of his many guests. And technically speaking, this move by the West will only further frustrate and antagonize the Russians. And this goes without mentioning the impending adoption of Ukraine into the fold. Next, Biden would bridge this conflict overseas to the United States. The bridge being one of the libs' favorite phrases, attacks on democracy. Russia is a threat to Ukrainian democracy, and what is their chief example of a threat to democracy domestically? Well, January 6th, and the MAGA insurrectionists, of course.
History is watching, just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you were here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War.
Yes, the greatest threat to democracy since the Civil War. Such a grave threat that was January 6, 2021, when protesters casually perused the Capitol building and took pictures with the Speaker's lectern. Such a dark day was it when Capitol Police served as tour guides and led those dastardly insurrectionists around the halls of Congress. A deadly day as well, as a total of one person died on the scene, a protester walking down the hall shot by a trigger-happy officer. Now, again, this was Biden's attempt to connect Trump supporters to Vladimir Putin. After this, he would say that Republicans want to bury the truth about January 6th, yet Republicans are the ones releasing thousands of hours of Capitol footage and subpoenaing officials for more information about that dreadful day. Biden also condemned the Republicans, saying this.
Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win.
Now, I know 2016 was such a long time ago, and I know 2000 was an even longer time ago. But does this president think that we're stupid enough to believe this garbage? Do you remember the rioting that happened when Hillary Clinton lost? Do you remember the election denial? How about when Bush won in 2000? Were you loving the country then, Mr. President? The moderates out there need to realize that Republicans and conservatives have protested the 2020 election because we love our country. And this remark was made even more rich by what he said next.
I ask all of you without regard to party to join together and defend democracy. Remember your oath of office to defend against all threats, foreign and domestic. Respect free and fair elections, restore trust in our institutions, and make clear political violence has absolutely no place in America, zero place.
Yes, let's condemn all political violence. But as you'll recall, you condoned, not condemned, you condoned and directly supported political violence with Black Lives Matter and Antifa in the midst of the prior administration. Now, this theme of division would continue all night long. There was a prevalent paradox throughout the speech where Biden would call for unity and then attack his political opponents, as he would do with the next subjects of IVF and abortion. Now, we've talked a lot about IVF and abortion the last few weeks, so we're not going to rehash a lot of that today. But if you missed episode 25, we did a full deep dive on the morality and bioethics of in vitro fertilization and exposed how evil and immoral it can be, not to mention how similar and comparable it is to the hideous practice of abortion. The former can sometimes create people by immoral means. Both have ended the lives of countless persons, and the latter, abortion, has only ever ended the lives of untold millions of babies. So, the president, of course, had his political pawns or guests in the gallery to campaign on these issues. Here's what he had to say about IVF.
Joining us tonight is Latoya Beasley, a social worker from Birmingham, Alabama. 14 months ago, she and her husband welcomed a baby girl thanks to the miracle of IVF. She scheduled treatments to have that second child, but the Alabama Supreme Court shut down IVF treatments across the state, unleashed by a Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. She was told her dream would have to wait. What her family had got through should never have happened. Unless Congress acts, it could happen again. So tonight, let's stand up for families like hers. To my friends across the aisle, don't keep this waiting any longer. Guarantee the right to AVF.
Guarantee the right to AVF, says the president. I'm not sure what AVF is, but I'm going to assume he's talking about IVF. Now, again, I'm not going to rehash everything I've already said about this, but I'll remind you of the central point we've made on this subject. The ends do not justify the means. Children are a wonderful end, but the immoral means of IVF should disqualify the process. It murders millions of babies in the earliest stage of their lives. The mother, Latoya Beasley, was sitting next to Jill Biden and next to another lady that you'll hear about in just a moment. But Biden says all of this, and both Democrats and Republicans stand in applause because the Democrats are genocidal maniacs and the Republicans are idiots. Biden has repeatedly tied this event to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which we debunked in episode 25. It has nothing to do with Roe v. Wade or that Supreme Court case. It has to do with Alabama statutes. But as we've explained in the last 2 weeks, the libs are in full attack mode because this Alabama court ruling undermines their position on abortion because their case ruled that embryos are children. And of course, Biden lays this at the feet of Donald Trump.
My predecessor came to office determined to see Roe v. Wade overturned. He's the reason it was overturned, and he brags about it. Look at the chaos that has resulted.
No, let's look at the tens of thousands of babies' lives it has saved. Thank God. Now, Biden turns to the woman next to Latoya and bridges the two subjects. Watch.
Joining us tonight is Kate Cox, the wife and mother from Dallas. She's become pregnant again and had a fetus of a fatal condition. Her doctor told Kate that her own life and her ability to have children in the future were at risk if she didn't act. Because Texas law banned her ability to act, Kate and her husband had to leave the state to get what she needed. What her family got through should have never happened as well, but it's happening in too many others. There are state laws banning the freedom to choose, criminalizing doctors, forcing survivors of rape and incest to leave their states to get the treatment they need.
So you have Kate Cox, who, under the advice of her doctor, left her home state to kill her baby, sitting next to LaToya Beasley, who had a baby via IVF. Look, the Christian stance on this is simple. The mother's so-called rights do not supersede that of the baby's. Okay? Their lives are absolutely equal. And in those situations he mentioned, in the awful events of, rape or incest, those do not change the value of the baby's lives. But then Biden takes this opportunity to directly threaten the Supreme Court justices in attendance.
It's a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court majority wrote the following, and with all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you were right about that.
Division, the central theme of the night, as Biden attacks his opponents, even those of the Supreme Court, a co-equal branch of the United States government. Now, of course, the night would not be complete without the Democrats' favorite subject, COVID-19. Regardless of the fact that we're 4 years away from the outset of the pandemic, there are still congressmen and women wearing their masks, virtue signaling to the rest of us. So watch as Biden takes credit here for fixing this health crisis.
President, my predecessor, failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to American people, the duty to care. I think that's unforgivable. I came to office determined to get us through one of the toughest periods in the nation's history. We have. It doesn't make news in 1,000 cities and towns. The American people are writing the greatest comeback story never told.
Liar, screams someone in the room. Look, we know that Trump didn't handle COVID perfectly. He took advice from some power-hungry bureaucrats. But Biden has done nothing more than push endless booster shots, which have arguably done more harm than good. And then Biden makes a bizarre claim about the vaccines curing cancer.
The pandemic no longer controls our lives. The vaccines that saved us from COVID are now being used to beat cancer, turning setback into comeback. That's what America does. That's what America does.
The truth is that the initiatives of the last two administrations did severe harm to children, young adults, and most of all, the American economy. They are to blame for the billions and billions of dollars added to our national debt, which currently sits at almost $35 trillion. But Biden says our economy is the envy of the world.
My inherited economy is on the brink. Now our economy is literally the envy of the world. 15 million new jobs in just 3 years, a record, a record. Unemployment at 50-year lows. A record 16 million Americans are starting small businesses, and each one is a literal act of hope.
Since Biden used the speech all night to attack his predecessor, let's compare the economies of both Trump and Biden. This is all information from the Media Research Center. Under President Trump, the average monthly inflation was 1.9%. Under Biden, 5.6%. Mortgage rates fell 32% under Trump. Under Biden, mortgage rates have risen 140%. Standard goods, which determines inflation numbers, these prices rose at 7.8% under Trump. In Biden's term, prices have risen at a rate of 18%. On gas prices, Trump's last month in office saw gas prices at $2.42 a gallon, even though they were lower prior to that. But since Biden has been in office, gas prices have risen 32%, the average price being $3.20 a gallon. And this is a direct consequence of Biden's policies upon entering office. And finally, on savings rates, or how much money people have in their bank accounts. Under Trump, savings rates rose 129%. Under Biden, they've fallen 71%. President Biden brags about the number of jobs he's created. But the numbers are totally misleading if you account for the number of jobs lost as a result of his economic policies. Next, speaking of the economy, Biden bragged about the omnibus infrastructure bill, which added trillions of dollars to our national debt.
Thanks to our bipartisan infrastructure law, 46,000 new projects have been announced all across your communities. And by the way, I noticed some of you strongly voted against it, or they're cheering on that money coming in. I like it. I'm with you.
It's simple economic logic. When you figuratively create more US dollars, it devalues our currency. That means that it takes more money to make more products, which become more expensive, and then you need even more dollars to purchase said products. Trump and Biden are both guilty for this. But obviously, Biden way more so than Trump. It would be a different story if the $2 trillion infrastructure bill actually went to infrastructure. But it did not. The American people deserve better than these loaded omnibus bills. And this is part of the reason for Kevin McCarthy's removal. He promised to pursue these single issue bills, but this wasn't. And now it's breaking the banks of average Americans. Next, Biden attacked Big Pharma and talked about drug prices. Nothing new here, but Biden said something odd about flying people in from around the world so that they could get cheaper medicine in the United States.
I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but if you want to get in Air Force One and fly to Toronto, Berlin, Moscow, even Moscow probably. And bring your prescription with you, and I promise you I'll get it for you for 40% the cost you're paying now. Same company, same drug, same place.
Now, honestly, I don't know how to react to this, but if I'm understanding this jumbled mess correctly, I don't think Americans are on board for flying foreigners on Air Force One to give them medicine. But somebody help me out in the comments. Next, though, Biden moved on to mortgage and housing prices and unveiled a plan to help Americans in that respect.
I want to provide an annual tax credit that will give Americans $400 a month for the next 2 years as mortgage rates come down, to put toward their mortgages when they buy their first home or trade up for a little more space. Just for 2 years.
$400 a month for 2 years to help with housing. This does not address the very reason why mortgage rates have tripled under Biden. And again, legislating money at the problem will only exacerbate the problem. You'll have a net zero or net negative effect as you put money into our pockets while it raises inflation and rates simultaneously. Next, Biden continues on this subject as he talks about tyrannically lowering rent prices.
For millions of renters, we're cracking down on big landlords who use antitrust law, who break antitrust laws by price fixing and driving up rents.
Simple question here. Why are rent prices high? Can you answer that question? Is it because landlords are just collectively evil? Or is it because the economy is so poor that they raise their prices just like every other business and industry? But you see, Biden knows that many Americans are upset about rent prices, so he placates to them. He tries to appease them, while he is in fact the reason why rent prices are staying higher than ever. Now, Biden takes a pause from all the economic gibberish to talk about education for a moment. Here's what he said about improving American education.
I want to expand high-quality tutoring and summer learning to see that every child learns to read by 3rd grade. I'm also connecting local businesses and high schools so students get hands-on experience and a path to good paying job whether or not they go to college. And I want to make sure that college is more affordable.
But Biden said more than this, and this is all fine and good, but if you want to improve American education, stop pushing critical theory subjects and gender studies, enable families to enroll their children in parochial schools, and stop attacking homeschooling. He would also go on to talk about canceling student loan debt, which for the 100th time, this is properly explained as reallocating student debt to the rest of us. The debts don't disappear by the waving of a magic wand. It unfairly distributes the debt onto 365 million Americans. Speaking of, now back to the economy. Listen to this whopper from Biden.
I've been delivering real results in fiscally responsible ways. We've already cut the federal deficit. We've already cut the federal deficit over $1 trillion. I signed the bipartisan deal to cut another $1 trillion in the next decade.
Fiscal responsibility is a complete joke. And you can claim all the cuts you want, but every cut you make is entirely offset by what you spend. And I'm just wondering, does anybody buy this garbage? Like, surely not the majority of Americans. Most Americans surely have the economic sense to this falsehood. And I think the polls in November will prove me right. And speaking of the deficit, Biden said that his predecessor added more to the federal debt than he has. Watch.
They added more to the national debt than any presidential term in American history. Check the numbers.
Okay, we did check the numbers. And they're close, but Biden is on course to add over $7.9 trillion to the federal deficit, while Trump added about $7.8 trillion. So that's a difference of around $100 billion. And he's also wrong about Trump's administration adding more than any president in U.S. history, because Barack Obama added over $9.5 trillion to the federal deficit. Biden would go on to talk about restoring the pandemic era policy of the child tax credit, which would, again, create more debt and devalue the currency and raise inflation. Net negative effect overall. He railed against big businesses and billionaires about paying their fair share of taxes, which in the former sense with businesses, it would crush businesses and the employees who work for them. It would put them out of business. In the latter sense, in taxing billionaires, this doesn't work either, because billionaires don't make their money like most of us do, okay? They have non-taxable assets that most Americans do not have. So this just sounds good when you say it out loud. Now, one of the largest contributors to our annual deficit is not Congress's random bloated bills. It's not military defense. It's Social Security, which is speeding towards the edge of a cliff called insolvency. The problems with Social Security are not the disability aspect of it or the survivor benefits. It's specifically retirement benefits. The bottom line is that people are living much longer lives now than when FDR started the program. The average life expectancy in 1935 was 60 to 65 years. But now the average is 78 to 80 years. In other words, Social Security is having to pay out about 20 years extra per person in retirement. Now, why do I say insolvency? Because even though most of you paid into Social Security out of your salaries and your paychecks, we're paying out to recipients more than is being contributed. For example, I checked today. The U.S. has spent $1.4 trillion on Social Security alone just this year. And all this to say, Social Security has to be reformed, like something has to change. But saying this out loud is apparently political suicide. This week, Ben Shapiro was crucified for saying so. Nikki Haley was, I think, the only candidate in the Republicans saying this. And here's President Biden on the subject.
Many of my friends on the other side of the aisle want to put Social Security on the chopping block. If anyone here tries to cut Social Security, Medicare, or raise the retirement age, I will stop you.
And there's the clapping seals in the audience. The Democrats were, I have to say, well rehearsed and well coached in enthusiasm, regardless of the stupidity Biden sprayed out of his mouth. Numerous times they chanted, 4 more years, 4 more years. And the American people watched in horror. Anyways, Biden says, don't you dare touch this thing, which is destroying our economy and will eventually dry up, leaving millions without support in the latter years of their lives. And then Biden returned to his Super Bowl shtick of complaining about snack sizes. Watch.
Too many corporations raise prices to pad their profits, charging more and more for less and less. That's why we're cracking down on corporations that engage in price gouging and deceptive pricing, from food to healthcare to housing. In fact, the snack companies think you won't notice if they change the size of the bag and put a hell of a lot fewer, same size bag, put fewer chips in it. No, I'm not joking. It's called shrinkflation. Pass Bobby Casey's bill and stop this. I really mean it.
Price gouging and deceptive pricing. Well, this is a half-truth. There is less in the bag, though you're not paying the same price, if not more. But it's not because of the evil big snack industry. It's because of inflation, which is entirely Joe's fault. Only he doesn't want you to know that, so he calls it shrinkflation. He wants to make American companies the bad guy, but he's the bad guy. Listen, the economic term for having to spend more money on fewer products is called inflation. When inflation happens, our money buys fewer goods and services than it did before. What causes inflation in the first place? Increased demand, rising production costs, changes in government policy, and fluctuations in monetary supply. It's not Big Snack, it's Big Joe, or the big guy, as his Chinese business partners call him. Now, just over halfway through this address, Joe Biden gets to the most contentious issue, immigration. It was definitely a strategy to put this topic in the middle of the speech because the middle of speeches are the most forgettable parts. That's why speeches start and end with the most memorable lines. So they thought they could tuck this into the middle and make it largely forgettable. But there were a few things that happened during the speech and some things that Biden said that just totally ruined this strategy. Here's the first thing Biden said on immigration.
My team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now.
First of all, we don't need to pass any bills to fix the southern border problems. All that has to be done is the enforcement of current and long-standing law. It's that simple. If we're talking about laws, we should be talking about reversing policies like catch and release, for example. We should be ramping up deportations. We should be returning to Trump's policies like remain in Mexico. But secondly, despite the onslaught and the caravans of migrants, I know that the immigration processing is slow. So if the government wants to hire more immigration staff to handle the volume of people, even on the normal basis, I'm fine with that. But solving the invasion on the southern border is as simple as enforcing the current law, not passing another stupid bill to stuff your friends' pockets.
The Border Patrol Union has endorsed this bill. The Federal Chamber of Commerce is, yeah. You're saying low, look at the facts. I know you know how to read.
Yes, we do know how to read, which is why we see straight through your baloney. You know, Joe is the reason why we have to do things like put directions on shampoo or caution warnings on coffee. He probably thinks that Cheerios are donut seeds and that Dunkin' Donuts is a basketball team. Like, there are a total of 2 brain cells, 2 in his head at this point, and they're both fighting for third place. Now, all kidding aside, what happened next was one of the most critical points of the whole night. But this requires some setup. On February 22nd, between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m., Laken Riley, a nursing student in Georgia, was out for a run when she was murdered by an illegal alien, a migrant from Venezuela. In other words, he should not have been here. It's been verified that since he's been here in the U.S., the 26-year-old savage has been arrested and released twice. See what I mean about catch and release? Several Congress members were wearing pins at the State of the Union, which read, "Say her name, Laken Riley." Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of those members, the representative for Georgia's 14th district, and she was sitting right at the center aisle. So when Biden came in, you can see Congresswoman Greene handing Biden a pen and saying to him, "Say her name, Mr. President." Now, we get to this part of the speech when Biden is talking about immigration, and Congresswoman Greene shouts Laken's name, asking, "What about Laken Riley?" Watch how Biden responds.
I'd be a winner, not really. Laken Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of the thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself. I understand.
That was incredibly rough. Biden picks up the pen that Marjorie gave him. He says Lincoln Riley instead of Laken Riley. He calls the criminal savage an illegal, which we'll talk more about in a moment. Then he downplays the murder by asking, but how many thousands are being killed by illegals? It's like he's saying, look, there's not that many people being killed by illegals. And then the icing on this turd sandwich is that he relates to Laken's parents because he lost a child too. Biden lost his son Beau to cancer. Okay? Laken had her head smashed in because you refuse to enforce strict border policies. Take a look at this ad from an organization called Building America's Future.
Laken Riley should have been able to go on a run in broad daylight without being murdered by an illegal immigrant. But Joe Biden promised not to deport illegal immigrants.
Should that person be deported?
That person should not be the focus of deportation.
Biden vowed not to detain illegal immigrants who crossed the border.
No one would be put in jail while waiting for their hearing.
So when Jose Ibarra crossed into America illegally, he was not deported. He was not put in jail. Biden also supported sanctuary cities.
Should undocumented immigrants arrested by local police be turned over to immigration officials?
No.
So when Jose Ibarra was arrested in New York City for endangering a child, he was freed a second time. Ibarra went to Georgia, where he beat Laken Riley to death. How many more killers has Biden set free? Building America's Future is responsible for the content of this advertising.
This is not stupidity. I know I was making jokes earlier, but this poor immigration policy and lax approach to border security is not from ignorance or stupidity. It is pure evil and an intentional effort to create chaos and disorder. Again, I'm going to prove all of this to you in the coming weeks. But Biden said all of this from the very beginning. This was the plan all along. He said so when he was campaigning. Like, those are clips that you just saw in the ad from when he was campaigning. But now he pretends like it's the Republicans' fault because they won't pass a bill. Biden accidentally let the cat out of the bag when he called Laken's murderer an illegal. Later on in the speech, he went back to the politically correct language.
I will not demonize immigrants saying they are poison in the blood of our country. I will not.
He's referring to Donald Trump when he says that. But what the Democrats wish to accomplish is this blanket painting of anyone who comes into the country, legally or illegally, as immigrants. They're all immigrants. No, the ones who come into the country to become U.S. citizens via the legal channels, the legal process, these are the ones that we call immigrants. We have millions and millions of those. The ones who break in and sneak in and mooch off of our system and steal and murder, these are the invaders. These are the illegals. They are in fact the ones that are corrupting the United States. And this case is a perfect example. So, since Biden mistakenly called the savage killer an illegal, he had to go on TV and correct that. So here he is on MSNBC.
During your response to her heckling of you, you used the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Laken Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented. And look, when I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country. The reason our economy is growing. We have to control the border and more orderly flow, but I don't share his view at all.
So you regret using that word?
Yes.
People like Jose Ibarra built this country. They're not vermin. They deserve respect. I'm sorry for saying illegal. No, Jose Ibarra is an absolute vermin. He was a criminal when he entered the country illegally. He was a criminal in New York, and guess what? He continues to be a savage criminal as he bashed in the head of a college student in Georgia. And as retribution for Laken's death, this massive failure of the Biden administration should spell the death of his presidency. What you'll realize in the coming weeks is that this has all been an intentional political strategy for Biden. Take a look at this from the Daily Mail. The Center for Immigration Studies found Biden's CBP, which is Customs and Border Patrol, approved the latest secretive flights that transported hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants from foreign countries into at least 43 different American airports from January through December 2023. In other words, last year, Biden flew all over the country over 300,000 migrants. And no one is talking about this. Take a look at this from Media Research Center. The average border encounters from 2012 to 2020, so that's an 8-year stretch from Obama to Trump, there was a yearly average of over 555,000 border encounters, meaning CBP encounters with intruders, not legal entries. By comparison, since Biden has been in office, so just in a 3-year period compared to the 8 prior, there have been each year over 2.3 million border encounters. The monthly average under Trump was about 50,000 encounters. The monthly average under Biden is over 200,000. Now just think about the quietness on that story. And then the screaming and complaining about Governor Abbott sending a few buses around the country. We're talking about 300,000 plus migrants. Next, let's talk for just a moment about what Biden says about the Freedom to Vote Act.
But 59 years later, there are forces taking us back in time. Voter suppression, election subversion, unlimited dark money, extreme gerrymandering. John Lewis is a great friend to many of us here, but if you truly want to honor him and all the heroes who marched with him, then it's time to do more than talk. Pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Right Act.
As you've probably heard, America is apparently systemically racist, and a prime example of this supposed systemic racism is in fact at the voting booth, where such racist acts occur, such as, asking someone to show their ID. I know, it's terrible, and it's also an incredible lie. To tell blacks and Hispanics that one form of America's white supremacy is by asking people to prove they are in fact who they say they are when they show up to vote, when it's literally every single person, regardless of skin color, who has to do such a thing. Remember when they said that voting lines were racist? My precinct is almost 100% Caucasian. We had to prove our citizenship. We had to prove our identity, that we lived in that precinct, that we lived in that district. We had to wait in a line. And you know why? Because that's every election that we've ever had. Next, Biden talked about banning books. Watch.
Banning books. It's wrong. Instead of erasing history, let's make history.
2 things here. Biden says that banning books is wrong, except the Bible, of course. We can ban the Bible from public school and public life, but we can't ban other books which, depict and describe in explicit detail homosexual acts and pornography or explain radical gender theory. Then Biden talked about how we shouldn't erase history, when that's all the liberals have done in American education for the last decades, from the collegiate level down to our elementary schools. We've lied to our children about America's founding, from the Native Americans to slavery. Next, the heat really turns up in the chamber when Biden moves on to this next subject.
State the obvious. All Americans deserve the freedom to be safe. And America is safer today than when I took office. Year before I took office, murder rates went up 30%. 30% they went up. The biggest increase in history. It was then.
Americans are safer than when Biden came into office. Well, that's obviously not true. The entire world is less safe because Biden came into office. With the disastrous pullout from Afghanistan as the catalyst, world leaders have observed the weakness of Joe Biden from the very beginning. And so China becomes more aggressive in seizing Taiwan under its full control. Russia moves to annex Ukraine. Islamic forces attack the state of Israel, and hundreds of thousands of military-age migrants from all over the world invade our southern border. The catalyst, or the first domino to fall, was the botched and disastrous pullout from Afghanistan in 2021, when we simply left tens of billions of dollars in American military equipment and political power to the Taliban, but most horrific was the death of 13 American troops. One of those 13 was Staff Sergeant Ryan Canals from my hometown, right here in Tennessee. Another one of those 13 was Lance Corporal Kareem Nikui, whose father was the one you just heard yelling at the president from the balcony. Steve Nikui. Here's Biden say that every American should be safe and that all Americans were safer because he's in office. And he shouted, "What about Abbey Gate, where his son was killed? What about that 2nd Battalion, the 1st Marines?" He was escorted out of the room. He was handcuffed and then escorted out. And now he faces a misdemeanor charge for crowding and obstructing. He talks about safety, Biden does, and then pivots to gun control. Watch.
My predecessor told the NRA he's proud he did nothing on guns when he was president. Oh. After another shooting in Iowa recently, he said, when asked what to do about it, he said, "Just get over it." There's his quote, "Just get over it."
Now let's take a look at the context, shall we? This is reported by the Des Moines Register, a paper in Iowa. Former President Donald Trump kicked off a rally in northwest Iowa on Friday by sending his support and deepest sympathies to the families and victims touched by the terrible school shooting in Perry. To the entire community, we love you, we pray for you, and we ask God to heal and comfort, really, the whole state, Trump said at the Get Out the Vote rally in Sioux Center. We're really with you as much as anybody can be. It's a very terrible thing that happened. It's just terrible, the leading GOP presidential candidate said. That's just horrible. It's so surprising to see it here. But we have to get over it. We have to move forward, the Republican frontrunner said. To all the relatives and all the people who are devastated right now to the point they can't breathe, they can't live, we are with you all the way. We don't have time today to get into the Second Amendment, but I suggest you go back and watch episode 4. It's called Buy a Sword. But here's what Biden said about banning so-called assault weapons and more.
I'm demanding a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Pass universal background checks. None of this. I taught the Second Amendment for 12 years. None of this violates the Second Amendment or vilifies responsible gun owners.
You can hear the sensible ones in the room understanding the glaring contradiction. First of all, none of these politicians can define an assault weapon. Look, my fists are assault weapons. A knife is an assault weapon. Heck, anything can be an assault weapon if it's used to assault someone. And they say this on purpose because it creates for them a slippery slope to take away all guns, not just the ones that look similar to military-style weapons. Second, though, none of what he just said would stop any mass shootings. None of it. Legislating firearms, which goes against the Second Amendment, would only serve to disarm law-abiding citizens who are, in fact, the ones who can respond to serious situations immediately. We have so many examples of this. An armed populace dissuades even more crime. Take away the guns and you'll likely see even more mass shootings. You'll see what I'm talking about. And I'm just saying, but I don't think that would go over well. And finally, Biden reached the sensitive subject and the conflict in the Middle East, that between Israel and Iranian-backed proxy militias like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. If you don't understand the religious history, the geographic history, and the reason for the overall conflict between Jews and Muslims for thousands of years, then you can't draw an accurate conclusion about the issue, and you shouldn't open your mouth as if you're some kind of expert. Last year, in October, I did 2 episodes that were solely dedicated to the very complicated understanding of this conflict. It was episode 9 and episode 11. There are 2 things Biden says about this conflict. The first is a new plan he's unveiled to deliver humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza.
Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day.
This past Saturday, the first U.S. ship carrying construction supplies to the Gazan coast left Virginia. The plan is to build a pier on the Mediterranean Sea on the coast of the Gaza Strip in order to deliver humanitarian aid directly to the people living there. It's been reported this will take 2 months and as many as 1,000 troops in order to get it going. Apparently, it will be able to deliver over 1 million meals per day. And so here are what I think are the likely outcomes of this move. First, the Gazan people will receive help and support and aid by food supplies and clothing and sheltering, etc. And that's great. We should never want anybody to be without food and clothing and shelter. However, the second outcome will surely be that Hamas will steal these supplies from their own people. It's what they've done over and over and over again. I mean, for example, if we go beyond this immediate conflict, back to just 3 years ago, the European Union donated or funded water pipes for the Gazans to have better drinking water. And Hamas dug them up, melted them down or cut them down, and used them to build rockets, which they then fired at Israel. And just remember how in this entire war, they have used their own citizens as human shields. Third, and finally, this will surely lead to direct United States military involvement, regardless of what Biden says. We're talking about jihadists, okay? We're talking about Islamic terrorists. They will take the opportunity when it's presented to them to strike the United States. And here in Gaza, even though we're on the sea, we're presenting them with 1,000 troops. Now, I hope that I'm wrong, but I'm sure the war hawks like Lindsey Graham are salivating over this move. Now, there's one more thing Biden says about this situation that you've heard 1 million times since all of this began. Take a listen.
As we look to the future, the only real solution to the situation is a 2-state solution over time.
I say again, if you do not know your history, this is the sort of stupid propaganda you repeat over and over. There will never be a 2-state solution. And do you know how I know that? Because the Palestinians have said so. On 2 occasions in recent history, Israel was ready and willing on both of those recent occasions, but no, the Palestinians want a single Palestinian state with 0 Jews. And that means that the Jews are either driven from their ancestral homeland or they're annihilated from the face of the earth. Many nations have tried to do this throughout history, and it never works out very well because, as it turns out, God really loves the Jewish people and will protect them until the end of days. The Western world is going to have to accept the fact that Israel will not rest until this terrorist group is wiped from existence. They will not stop. You are wasting your time by calling for things like a ceasefire. They will not stop until Hamas is no more. Now, I'm not justifying the killing of civilians in the crossfire, that are caught in the crossfire, but I am saying that's more so Hamas's fault than Israel, because Hamas embeds themselves amongst their people because they're selfish cowards. And another side note, I don't think that Israel needs our help. Israel knows what they're doing. They have a small but incredibly impressive military. They have one of the most impressive intelligence operations. They don't need weapons or money. Whether we get involved or not, Israel will prevail. In closing, Biden said this about the future.
Again and again, I've seen the contest between competing forces in the battle for the soul of our nation. Between those who want to pull America back to the past and those who want to move America into the future. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas that only take us back. You lead America, the land of possibilities. You need a vision for the future and what can and should be done.
You can't lead a nation with ancient ideas. And therein lies the source of all of our problems. We have forsaken ancient philosophy, but more importantly, the guidance by and trust in God Almighty, the Creator, inscribed in the Declaration. This perfectly illustrates the war between conservatism and progressivism. Biden even described it as a battle for the nation's soul. One side wants to keep us anchored in these biblical traditions and godly institutions of family and gender and sanctity of life, liberty, morality, etc., while the other side wants to not only abandon that, but destroy anything and anyone that stands for those traditional building blocks on which we currently stand. Well, I think I've given you enough to chew on for a week or so I won't see you next week. I'll be back the week of Easter, but that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light you were meant to be, and we'll see you next time on We the Free. Thanks for watching. Listen, I want to make sure you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it, so do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we would love for you to check out WeTheFreeShow.com to grab yourself some merch or to spread the word about We the Free. And we're also going to put a video on the screen that we'll think that you'll like. So now, go and be that salt and light, and we will see you next time